Last year was an amazing year for the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts. It was our 50th anniversary, and we had a big extravaganza in October. Let me just ask, how many of you were here for that celebration? It's great to have you back. We completed the renovations of 29 of 30 galleries. We were able to open the William C. and Susan S. Mariner Southern Ceramics Gallery that has blown away anybody and everybody with any interest in early Southern ceramics, because it is a collection that cannot be rivaled anywhere at any time. If you are interested in the study of early Southern ceramics, this is really the place for you. But we were also able to open the Carolyn and Mike McNamara Southern Masterworks Gallery, where highlights from the MESDA collection can now be seen and appreciated and studied by more people than ever before in the best setting that it's ever had before. And Carolyn and Mike are with us tonight, and I think we should all express our deep gratitude for what they've done. And if that wasn't enough, we had to have some good old down-home Southern barbecue with a little bourbon and bluegrass mixed in for good measure. And then we could go to Grayland, the wonderful country estate of the Gray family, built right in the 1920s before the stock market crash, and a wonderful place for a wonderful evening, where Daniel Ackerman and Stuart Butler put together the most amazing event, the auction, where people who love MESDA and people who love Southern Decorative Arts could come together under the watchful guidance of what we call the three tenors of the early Southern auction world, with Jeff Evans and Bronk and Leland Little, Andrew Bronk and Leland Little, doing a masterful job. And what I can report is that that auction was so successful, raising funds to endow the MESDA Summer Institute, that during that weekend in October, thanks to the help of everybody here who was there, we raised $250,000 for the endowment for the MESDA Summer Institute. And augmented by private fundraising, we have now raised over $600,000 with the goal of seeing the MESDA Summer Institute fully endowed, so that every top student in America who wants to come here to study the MESDA collection, to learn early Southern material culture, will never, ever have money as the impediment for doing that. The best students will always be able to come here. That's our goal, and we're almost there. And that weekend in October was critical. Now, you'll have to notice that one of the supporters of that effort was our keynote speaker this evening.
Did I send the money?
I think you have a note from Catherine in your... I first met Peter Kenny back in the 90s, and we were talking about MESDA Summer Institute and Summer Institute projects, and I did a project on Dutch influence in 17th century Southern decorative arts, both ceramics and furniture. And I remember the first time I met Peter Kenny, because he had just done an exhibition and published a catalog at the Met on American costume. And I thought I was meeting the next best thing to one of the 12 apostles.
Peter was an apostle.
I had met the Apostle Peter, and and had a copy of that catalog from my own library, and it meant everything. And Peter has gone on to become such a scholar on early American cabinet makers like Lanoyer, like Fife. Such a distinguished career at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, spearheading and overseeing the renovations of all of its galleries in the American wing. And then when a wonderful organization, the Classical American Homes Preservation Trust, with such strong North Carolina connections through its founder, Dick Jenrette, was looking for additional leadership. And when you've got 7 historic houses with the best collections of Duncan Fife furniture anywhere in America, who do you want to occupy that leadership position but the country's leading expert on Duncan Fife? And if you can make that happen, it's magic. So Peter Kenny now brings that magic to an organization with strong North Carolina connections, to an organization that oversees historic houses in South Carolina and in North Carolina, in a way that makes us make Peter Kenny an honorary Southerner. And it's an honor to have him as our keynote speaker this evening. Peter Kenny.
Well, that was great. That was the nicest introduction I've ever had, Robert. I'm very serious about that. Heartfelt, and I felt very much the same about Robert from the first time I met him. And you're very lucky to have him here. He's the best of the best, and he's got the enthusiasm and the energy that makes it work. That makes all of this worthwhile. I work at Classical American Homes Preservation Trust. I'm sort of a split personality, suddenly I'm feeling. I had 30 years in the American wing at the Met. I was an administrator and a curator. I mean, if you ask me my memories of administration, mostly forget about it. But as a curator, it was the best. It was just the best. And now I'm working for one of the greatest gentlemen in the country. I hope doing a good job for him. But tonight what I'm going to try to do for you is sew this together somehow. I know everybody here is preaching to the converted in a way. You're all furniture enthusiasts, and I won't let you down. It'll be a bit of an adventure through houses and furniture. And I think also the title of my lecture tonight, I hope, is not too provocative, but I'll try to kind of, in the beginning, explain what I'm talking about. The first thing I wanted to say to Andy is that I had a little time. I didn't go to the over to the galleries. Instead, I went up to, I think it was Fifth Avenue, and I found the 2 armchairs that go with your table. Yeah, but truth be told, true confessions. I mean, I just sort of let it all hang out tonight. I had a long career as a museum curator. I probably had no business getting into the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I went to Cooperstown graduate program in history museum studies. I love history. I taught for a while. I love furniture. I actually left teaching to be a furniture restorer. And the reason that I started to laugh looking at today's presentation, faux paint on a Renaissance Revival table, faux painting a replacement for it, was that I worked for a man for about 3 years, and while I was doing this, I couldn't make enough money, so I started a little business on the side. So there was a man in the Hudson Valley who owned a restaurant, and he stuffed it full of antiques, and I figured he offered me a job to take care of a few things, and maybe I'd have work for a while to sort of make some money. And the first thing he brought me was a Renaissance Revival armchair. And he said, "This is a mess. It needs to be repaired. And I want you to strip it. I want you to refinish it." Yeah, well, so in those days, I said, fine. So first thing I did was to strip the chair, and then I was going to take it apart. I tackled it. And Andy, I could have used you because on the crest rail, here I think there's a mask. On the crest rail was a panel of the most beautiful burl walnut. As I stripped it, I watched the burl walnut disappear. I was not very good at veneering. I was not very good at faux painting, so I actually re-veneered it with a piece of burl. So the man has a chair like that. And I enjoyed that very much. But I also enjoyed having Andy show us about faux painting, and we're going to talk a little bit about it today. American furniture, so what's the point of this story? I mean, it's a great open-ended title, but the reason I bring this up is I think we're at an interesting time right now. I am pretty tired of people saying brown furniture's dead, brown furniture's dead, brown furniture's dead. Nobody says that here, right? We love it, it's great, but brown furniture's dead. And the reason it's dead is people don't understand why, no matter when it's made, no matter what the level of quality, it's got a historical basis. There's an excitement about it. One of my heroes in my life, is an interesting man who teaches at Bard College in the Hudson Valley. He's an historian. His name is Mark Lytle. He's actually just retired. And back in the early 80s, in 1982, he wrote a book with his partner, Jim Davidson, another historian at Bard, called After the Fact, The Art of Historical Detection. Mark is an interesting guy. I remember in the 80s, I knew him back then. He used to sort of say, well, nobody likes history anymore. I was just like getting bored with him after a while, Sort of like when you're a kid, your father's the stupidest guy in the world. Now Mark's retired. I think he's actually the smartest guy in the world. In this book, in the introduction, he wrote something that I think actually is going to allow us to reclaim brown furniture as just as important as anything else. Not in the marketplace, but just in our minds. Let me read a little bit about what he said. This book is an attempt to bring more life to the reading and learning of history. I was troubled by a growing disinterest in or even animosity toward the study of the past. How is it then that when we and other historians have found so much that excites curiosity, other people find history, furniture history, irrelevant and boring? Perhaps we thought if lay readers and students understood better how historians go about their work, how they examine evidence, how they pose questions, and how they reach answers, history would engage them as it does us. As often happens, it took a mundane event to focus and clarify our preoccupations. One day, while working on another project, we went outside to watch a neighbor farmer cut down a large old hemlock that had become diseased. As his saw cut deeper into the tree, we joked. He joked it had now been into history as far back as the Depression. Depression, grunted the old friend. I thought you fellows were historians. I'm deep enough now, so Hoover wasn't even a gleam in his father's eye. With the tree down, the three of us examined the stump. Our woodcutter surprised us with what he saw. Here's when my folks moved in this place, he said, pointing to a ring, 1922. How do you know that without counting the rings, we asked. Oh, well, he said, as if the answer was obvious. Look at the core. Here, the rings are all bunched up tight. I bet there were 60 or 70, and all within a couple of inches. Those came when the place was still forest. Then you notice the rings started getting fatter all of a sudden. That's when my dad cleared behind the house in 22, and the tree started getting more light. And look further out here, see how the rings are getting together again for a couple of years. That's from the loopers. Loopers, he said? We asked cautiously. Sure, loopers, the ones that with only front legs and back. His hand imitated it looping, hopping and crawling along like an inchworm. Those damn things nearly killed the tree. That was sometime after the war, 49 or 50. As his fingers traced back and forth on the concentric circles, he spoke of other events from years gone by. Before we returned home, we had learned a good deal about the past in this area. Now it occurs to us that our neighbor had a pretty good knack for putting together history. The evidence of the past, like the tree rings, comes easily enough to hand, but we still need to be taught how to see it, how to read it, and explain it before we can turn around and turn it into a story. Even more to the point, the explanations and interpretations behind the story often turn out to be as interesting as the story itself. After all, the fascination in our neighbor's account came from the way he traced the tale out of those silent tree rings. He looked, and he saw. The same way you're going to hear talks tomorrow about box lopers, not loopers. The same way you're going to hear stories about a cabinet maker struggling to make a living somewhere. All coming from the physical evidence of the object. It's extremely exciting. What we have to do is tell the stories and get people excited, just like the man who was cutting down that tree. Luckily, a place like MESDA, the Chipstone Foundation, publish these wonderful journals where everybody gets the chance to write in these things. That's what I love about it. You don't have to have a PhD. Just write a good manuscript. Show it to Gary. If it's good stuff and you're energized, it'll be a turn on for people. And when you look at furniture with people who know what they're talking about, it can be great fun. So tell the stories. The story is the story. I'm not going to talk to you about brown furniture tonight. The problem with brown furniture is not dead, it's just that it's brown. I'm going to talk to you about things that are a little more lively, and that's one of the reasons that I went to work for Dick Jenrette. All furniture is not brown, it's marble, it's very antique, it's all these wonderful things, but it also is the progression of American history over time. It's how the cabinet making business changes. It's how styles come rolling in. It's how a country that's growing begins to show its independence. And all of these things were very exciting for this man, Dick Jenrette, who I work for now, who specialized in acquiring houses from the period from 1800 to 1840, the formative period of the United States, which is actually incredibly exciting. And it's not just about the beautiful things, it's about the past, it's about the stories that are connected to it. Dick Jenrette is a famous person outside of the world of historic preservation. He was the founding partner in Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette, the first private investment company to go public on the stock exchange. And he was also a chairman and CEO of the Equitable Assurance Society of New York, now known to us as AXA. He had a great and tremendous career as a leader. I think he's a leader in the field today. He's a self-confessed houseaholic. He can't help himself when he sees houses. He still gets calls and he still gets excited about them. But I think we've settled into a time now with his houses where we're pretty well set on what we're doing. In 1993, Dick Jenrette formed the Classical American Homes Preservation Trust, and into it he put 6 houses that are all outstanding in their own way. Many of them in the South, 2 in South Carolina, 1 in North Carolina, 2 in New York, and 1 in St. Croix in the Virgin Islands. Tonight, I'm going to take you through these houses, and we're going to look at them, and we're going to look at some of the furniture and what the possibilities are for the future for study. Why these houses are important, not just the furniture and how that plays out, but architecture sort of as the mother of the arts, or the nexus from which all the arts sort of spring. It will help us to sort of see how classical furniture fits in so beautifully in these spaces. The 6 houses in the trust are all listed here above. If you take a second, you can look at them. They range in date from 1815, Air Mountain, Hillsborough, North Carolina. And I want to mention at this time that Shotzi Crowther is here. She and her husband Bill are our estate managers there and do an absolutely fantastic job. And I hope you get to meet Shotzi while you're here. She's here to keep me honest and report back to Dick on everything that I say. I'll do the best I can, Shotzi, I promise. So you have Edgewater on the Hudson in Barrytown, New York, Milford Plantation, Pinewood, South Carolina, about 45 minutes from Columbia, South Carolina, the capital, the Roper House in Charleston, Estate Kane Garden in the U.S. Virgin Islands, Air Mountain, Hillsborough, and the George F. Baker houses, which include a carriage house and George F. Baker Sr.'s townhouse in New York, the headquarters for Classical American Homes Preservation Trust. Currently, Airmount and Milford Plantation are in the trust, as well as the carriage house at the Baker houses where our corporate offices are. But the other buildings remain in Dick's hands, and they're his residences. As long as he lives in them, they won't be in the trust. But he's extremely generous, and we allow groups, and groups can be anywhere from a busload to 2, to visit those houses. He's very kind about giving permission to do that as well. And those are very special experiences. As you look at that tree, and we'll use this as our motif, and think about when Dick was buying these houses, you can see the years. Those of you who know tree rings realize that I've even marked it cleverly when some are bought in the summer and the spring, and some in the slow growth season in the fall and the winter. But we'll move back to 1929 for Dick, right here, about here, I suppose, and born in Raleigh, North Carolina, graduate of the University of North Carolina, a man of the South, called the last gentleman on Wall Street in the New York Times. But as I mentioned before, his great passion outside of business was historic houses. And we will kind of march through some of these now. The first house that Dick bought was the Roper House on the East Battery in Charleston, South Carolina. Some of you may have visited there. Has anybody in this group ever been to the Roper House? Good. A few of you. I hope everybody gets to visit there at some point. It's gorgeous. Here we have an 1831 view of the East Battery, and the Roper House actually originally stood out somewhere out here. This is the Edmondson Alston House that's there to this day, and a sort of different look to it in 1831 and 1838. It gets changed. Thomas Roper, Robert Roper's father, lived on the East Battery, And in 1838, Robert Roper, who was wealthy enough, was able to purchase, I think, 5 lots, sold 3 lots, sold 2 of them off, and built his house, Roper House, on a particular lot. The location of Roper House is literally where the Cooper River flows into the Charleston Harbor, and Charlestonians, I guess without too much irony, are known to say that the Cooper and the Ashley come together in Charleston Harbor to form the Atlantic Ocean. It's a beautiful place, and I think one of the nicest things about it is it's just rife with history. If you look at Roper House, and we'll go back one slide to it, you see a grand colonnade on it, built in 1838. Charleston is known for its houses from the earlier periods, the 18th century and early 19th century. And by 1838, the Greek Revival style is really all the rage in New York and in Europe, and Roper is avant-garde in building this. This is the Charleston Hotel, literally completed this almost the same year as Roper House. It was almost finished in 1838. It had been finished actually previous to that. It burned and was rebuilt again. It was designed by an architect named Charles Reichert, who came to New York in 1836. He was a student of Carl Friedrich Schinkel, the great neoclassical architect from Berlin. And he trained with him, and he actually worked in his office for a period of time. Came to New York and was brought to Charleston by the Hampton family to build the grandstand for the Washington racetrack, and also with a consortium of other businessmen to build this grand Charleston Hotel. This plays an important role. Here is a Schinkel, the Altus Museum, his famous museum, where you can see a stoa-like or a colonnade across the front that is famous to this day. And Charleston is sort of accepting this, and we think about the great house that Roper built, and we realize we're looking at the colonnade being applied to a classic vernacular Charleston house with a side porch to get the breeze. Oftentimes you'll see 18th century houses with entry points under that porch, and it's a wonderful combination of the two. Some people have said Reichert may have designed that house. I'm not so certain about it, but if he did, he certainly was with the participation of Roper, a Charlestonian, who knew the vernacular style and wanted something like it. We get to know Dick a little bit in this house. I want to talk to him a little bit about as a collector tonight, but also as a grand sort of decorator of the interiors. He worked with other people to get his look, but his houses have a very distinct look to him. This is the double parlor on the second floor of the Roper house. The first floor was dedicated to an office space for Mr. Roper, and there was a dining room at the back. But the double parlor on the second floor is the grand room, and you can see in here an 1838 house with Duncan Fife furniture of a New York period of about 1815 to 1820 or so, and it holds up beautifully in this interior. There's no reason why it wouldn't. The scale of it is actually more delicate than you find in a little later period, but it works just fine. And Dick, of course, is a consummate decorator, and he has everything keyed. The blue and gold curtains, the blue and gold Paris porcelain, the gilding on the table, the blue fabric on the sofas and the chairs, all of this is in beautiful harmony. He utilized David Byers of Atlanta, of the Brown Brothers, to do his interior colors and his curtains as well. And I had a conversation with him the other day about this, and I was saying to Dick, I said, how beautiful it is, and isn't it, I just made a guess. I said, you must have sort of looked at that French porcelain to see that blue color and put it in there. He goes, oh, no. What we looked at was the portrait by Harriet Kenny Peale, the wife of Rembrandt Peale of Washington, over the mantle. And the gilding of the clock to come up with the gold and the blue scheme. They loved his epaulettes, they loved his blue coat, and they wound up, of course, with the blue and gold interior. And when this was actually completed by Dick, this interior, probably about 1984 or so, he also had been completely taken in by the restoration in the late 70s of the state capitol here in Raleigh. So if you look at the carpet in this space, you see that he also is looking to the carpets that were put down in the state capitol in Raleigh. And you begin to get a sense about Dick's decorating style, which is a beautiful style, but in a way it's almost kind of governmental or formal and very wonderful in the sense that he's not afraid to mix what we would consider to be public and private. And that's very much who he is, too, about his houses. He likes to have people come in, and all sorts of people visit him at his houses. And when you're there, you have sort of your The same way I suppose your sense of decorum and your sense of refinement are lifted in a beautiful government building. You kind of get that same sense of feeling when you enter some of his other spaces as well. And you'll see that in some of these interiors. The next house he bought is actually the house that he cut his teeth on as a collector, Edgewater in 1969. So back to back, Dick has bought two houses. He bought the Roper House in 68 because he had been working on the Mills Hotel in Charleston, the restoration of that. And he found this house and he thought it'd be the Roper House would be a great place to retire someday. He said that again and again about his houses. He actually bought it from a man named Hasty, and his mother, Drayton Hasty, and his mother, Sarah, who was 76 at the time, got a life tenancy in the house in 1968, and she was not thought to be in good health. She lived to be 90, and Dick could never move in. So it wasn't until 1984 that he actually got a shot at moving into the house and doing some decorating as well. He bought Edgewater as a weekend house, this beautiful house along the Hudson. He was working in New York City for DLJ, and this was the perfect choice for him. It was about an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes from New York City, so he could get away on the weekends and relax. This is a beautiful house that was originally built by a Livingston family member who had married a Charlestonian named Captain Lowndes Brown. The grounds are gorgeous. Originally when the house was conceived, I think there were 240 acres to it. Dick has 13 acres there now. It's on a nice inlet. Here's the sort of way in, and the gardens are absolutely gorgeous. You get to the sort of front of the house, and the old ancient locust trees stand like columns, as you see on the porch front, reminding us, I think, in some ways about the beauty of classicism in Arcadia. You know, we think of it so often in a setting of Washington, D.C., or a public building today, and it can be a turnoff to the public, but if we sort of really look back on classical traditions, we realize these sites of antiquity were in the landscape and really have a place there. And Dick, I think, loves that about a country villa like this. He bought it from none other than Gore Vidal, the writer, in 1969. The house was in the family of Lowndes Brown and Margaret Livingston Brown from 1825 when it was built until 1852, at which time it was sold, and I'll get into who bought it in a moment. It was then occupied by another Southerner until the early 20th century. Then the house sort of fell into disuse. Two different owners rarely were there. In 1950, Gore Vidal purchased it and wrote some of his novels there. Loved the house quite a bit. Lived there until 1969, as I mentioned before. Gore Vidal's latest, the biography on him, is called The Empire of Self. And I think one of the lines that's sort of quoted in that, I think is very appropriate it explains very much who it was. He said, "Every time a friend succeeds, a little piece of me dies." Nice guy, huh? Dick talks about him in interesting ways. He also says that Gore was famous. People would tell him stories about when they would go to the house for dinner. The railroad passed by behind the house and was put in the 1850s, and it was rather loud. He'd always time his dinner parties so that he would say to somebody, you know when the train was coming, "Now tell me about yourself." The train would rumble by and then he'd get back to business again. So the house also is famous because you have two people here who were cousins, FDR and Daisy Suckley, walking Fala, FDR's dog. In fact, she presented it to FDR. When her diaries were published, it was written that she and FDR, when the house was in disuse, in the middle of World War II, would go and watch sunsets over the Hudson towards the Catskills, sitting on that porch. So it's a place where famous people have been, and I think a place that deserves to stay for a long time, just for those reasons, but also because Dick has made it more beautiful. The house has become, in a way, a place that Dick has gathered family possessions from both the Livingston family, the Brown family, Lowndes Brown, Charleston. There aren't any things in there by him from that family now. And a second owner of the house, Robert Donaldson. The woman on the left is Margaret Brown Livingston, and she was given a deed to the land by her father, John R. Livingston, the brother of Chancellor Livingston, in 1823, and she and her husband, Captain Lowndes Brown, who had attended West Point from Charleston, married her and was presented with the property and also with the funds to build the house. There's some thinking that that wonderful Palladian Doric, Roman Doric facade, temple form building that we saw was the result of Lowndes Brown and the connection to Robert Mills in Charleston, who was working in this style, very advanced sort of Jeffersonian Palladianism. And it's rare for the Hudson Valley of the house and really quite beautiful. This is her sister on the right, Julia, who as a young girl traveled to France. And while in France at the age of 18, she suddenly died. Here she is on the farm above the house and the property that was given to her sister by her father at her father's home in the gardens of Messina by John Vanderlyn. And so Dick has gathered a number of these things back to the house. But the key figure in the house is Robert Donaldson. Now, Dick worked for Donaldson, Lefkin, and Jenrette, and there's no Donaldson connection at all, but there's some wonderful connections between Dick and Robert Donaldson. They're both graduates of the University of North Carolina. They both came to New York as young men in their mid to late 20s and made their marks in New York. Robert Donaldson is the son of a Scottish trader who ran a company store in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and the surrounding areas. And his brother bankrolled it from London, where he was a merchant banker. Robert Donaldson's father and mother both died, leaving him, the eldest, to care for the children when he was only 20 years old. Luckily for him, the father's brother died as well, and a massive fortune came his way in 1820. And so he went to London, and he had his portrait painted by Robert Leslie, who was an American painter in Paris in 1820, and he toured London, and he came back with his money, and he spent it wisely and well. He was a patron of the arts. There's no question about it. He worked exclusively with A.J. Davis on his projects, the great architect from New York City. In 1828, he purchased a house on the Battery in New York City that belonged to Archibald Gracie, a merchant in New York City. Gracie Mansion was his country house, and our mayor of New York lives in that today. And he had a doorway designed for the Gracie Mansion, which had been built probably about 1795 or so in the Greek Revival style by Davis. And he also planned with Davis in 1838 a massive Gothic pile in the collegiate Gothic style that he never built for East Fishkill on the Hudson. He did actually, shortly after that, begin engaging Davis again to build the most beautiful, probably the first bracketed Hudson Valley cottage ornée built in 1838 on the grounds of what today is Bard College in Annandale-on-Hudson. And between 1838 and 1852, he built out the most beautiful property working with Davis and Downy, A.J. Downy, the horticulturist. In fact, he is credited with bringing those two together for the first time and working on the property. And in Downing's book, Rural Residences, he dedicates the book to Robert Donaldson, and in it he says, dedicated to Robert Donaldson, Esquire, Arbiter Elegantiarum, or the ultimate arbiter of taste. Donaldson had money, he had taste, he had advanced taste, and he lived in this beautiful location for really 38 to 52, not that long a period of time, but born in 1800, he was already 52 years old. 1852 is when the Livingstons left their house. It was called Riverside at that point. And the reason they left it was Lowndes Brown and his wife Margaret were shocked and stunned by the fact that the right-of-way for a railroad was given by the state of New York to a railroad to run the tracks literally 30 yards behind Edgewater or Riverside. And at that point, actually Lowndes Brown died. I don't know if it was an apoplexy. And his widow, Margaret Brown, went to London and lived with her daughter in London, vowed never to return to New York again, and left, and sold the property to Robert Donaldson. Donaldson, the ever-improver, Donaldson sold Blythewood, and with that money he bought Edgewater, and with it, I think, as much as 200 acres of land. He had grand plans to build that great pile high on a hill above where the Edgewater is today. But at some point, he realized it would cost too much money, and he didn't have it. And so he wrote to A.J. Davis and said, "I will live out the rest of my life in this temple by the river." And he did, from 1852 until 1879 when he died. But here is a drawing by Donaldson himself that was sent to Davis and then updated by Davis with a few ideas in pencil to improve the look of the house. Here is the core of Edgewater as it was built, just this square, and the rooms really never changed. Here you have the stair hall, and over here he's calling it a bedroom. The additions were a library, an octagonal library. This looks like a doping room, but it's really a dressing room when you read it. A greenhouse with a glass corridor that connected. This was never built, but the Octagon Library was, and as was the bedroom. The dressing room was smaller in the end. It's now a bar, and this is a bathroom, by the way, with sliding doors, but that doesn't matter. Essentially, the house was respected by Davis and Donaldson. What had previously been an arcaded lower section that you had light that went into the basement level was covered by a terracing of grass to make the house larger looking and more impressive. And it was coated with the addition of the Octagon Library on the left. And the whole house was rough cast and stuccoed to look like brownstone. Prior to that, it had just been a brick house. So if you want to think about Robert Mills and his style of building, I think we can sort of connect the dots here, the arcaded windows. We haven't really broken through on this yet, but it's, I think, a decent theory. The interior of Edgewater is extraordinary. Here's the stair hall when you come in. It's basically a pavilion filled with light, and Dick loves light, and I think the Donaldson as well. The French doors are open to the porch, to the Hudson. When you visit there all day, the doors are wide open. The air just flows in and out. Somehow there's no bugs at Dick's place. I have no idea why that's the case. Robert Donaldson's portrait that he owns over the sideboard in the room. The parlor with lots of light as well. And the view through to the Octagon Library that was done by A.J. Davis in 1853. It was completed. Notice the round-headed windows in here, but by this point they are Romanesque, very much of that 1853 period. But somehow it all kind of plays together very nicely. When it was first done, it was Gothic. It was sort of a combination Gothic, classical design. And Dick has sort of, when he got it, he sort of went full out for the classical style on it. There's a point of discussion that is very interesting. When Dick acquired Edgewater in 1969, this is the moment when he sort of decided that I need to decorate the place. He first did it all in English. Dick was an English furniture collector. He liked French furniture. He liked English furniture. He worked with a man named Tony Hale, who helped him to do places. But he came into contact for the first time with a man named Edward Mason Jones, who was the architect of the White House during the Nixon administration, just after the Kennedy moment. Here's Pat Nixon and Julie Nixon. On the left, Clem Conger of the White House curator and the State Department collection, and David Richmond Byers, who worked with Dick and with Edward Mason Jones on the curtains for the White House and also on a number of things for Dick's properties as well. He also got to know Barry Tracy, who was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art as the curator there and the head of the department for a period from the mid-60s until the early 80s. And Barry was the sort of quintessential expert on Duncan Phyfe and all things New York in terms of furniture. In fact, I sometimes think I would love to have met him. I never met him. He died in 1983, I think. 86, and so I really never got a chance to meet him, but apparently he was incredibly knowledgeable. And he's with Ron Kane, another collector. This group of people, Dick and Edward Mason Jones and Barry Tracy and Ron Kane, were known as the Empire Mafia. That was their nickname. And this was another member of the Empire Mafia as well, a great friend of Dick Jenrette's, Dick Button, who still stops by in New York with dozens of eggs from his farm on a regular basis, and continues to buy Duncan Phyfe furniture. They love this furniture, and this group of people together kind of aided and abetted the interest in the whole thing. So Dick began to fill out the house with beautiful examples that he would buy at auction. He'd find Livingston things, ceramics, porcelain, furniture. But then one day he got a phone call from somebody who said, "You know, Dick, I just saw your lady in Antiques Magazine." And he said, "Well, who's my lady?" Mrs. Robert Donaldson, who was the wife of Robert Donaldson, Susan Gaston Donaldson from New Bern, North Carolina. And that's her portrait that we see in the background. And Dick said, well, where is it? It's at the Brooklyn Museum. Mrs. J. Murray Haskell, who was a great collector in the early 20th century, purchased from Isabel Donaldson, Robert Donaldson's surviving daughter, who lived in Summit, New Jersey, the portrait of Susan Gaston Donaldson, the recamier that you see here, and a pair of, the harp that's in the painting with Susan Donaldson, standing on the balcony of the house with the balustrade done by A.J. Davis, looking out on New York Harbor from State Street, where they lived in 1828. And you'll see the harp, and you also notice in the picture a little piece of seating furniture, a window bench. And Mrs. Haskell purchased from Isabel Donaldson the pair of window benches that are in that painting as well. So this is wonderful little suite of furniture that she bought, didn't particularly like or have in her house because she collected earlier Fife and 18th century furniture, gave it all to the Brooklyn Museum. So Dick made a beeline there, and he made a deal for a life interest in having these things at Edgewater. The window seats have since been returned, and he's made copies of them. You can see that how advanced the design of these window seats are. They come right out of George Smith's Household Furniture and Interior Decoration pattern book from 1808. And it's interesting to think of Robert Donaldson going to London in 1820 and seeing late Regency furniture and coming back and wanting something extremely special. And Fife delivered. Not only did he deliver for the Arbiter Elegantiarum, who he knew had taste and money, but he signed the window seat for him as well. That's his own signature on it. Incredibly rare on the sacking bottom that's underneath it. The seat cushion that's on it, when we undid the mattress on the top of it, which is original, it was written as the date July 4th, 1826. So he did it for him on July 4th, 1826, or the man working on it knew that was a very important day. It was the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. I don't think he knew that Jefferson and Adams died on the same day, but it's a sort of poignant thing to see. And as you look at furniture and find these little details on it, they really get you thinking. The recamier that was also that came from the family as well, and very distinctive antique style feet. If you look at old images of actually antique Roman couches or what survived from them, the bronze elements, it's very eccentric sort of turning on it. So all of this looks a little exotic to our eye, but it's extremely advanced antique style furniture. Among the things that that were sold by Isabel Donaldson to Mrs. Haskell was the furniture, but she also had a copy made of the bill of sale for Duncan Fife's furniture to Robert Donaldson when he still lived in Fayetteville, North Carolina in 1822 after his father had died and he got his inheritance. So we found almost all of the furniture on here. We had the good fortune of finding the center table, which is at Winterthur now. The rosewood sofa Dick was able to acquire at Sotheby's. The pair of card tables we've just acquired at Edgewater, and Dick has acquired them for Edgewater a year ago. The pier table I know was sold at auction not too long ago. Can't find it quite yet. I have pictures of it. The chairs, we don't know where the chair cushions or the ornamental chairs are yet, but they're out there to be found, and we will. The card tables are fascinating, and I think they allow us to sort of do what the kind of history that Mark Vidal was referring to, sort of digging in, looking at the tree rings and thinking about where they take us. I've looked at a lot of Duncan Fife furniture in my life. I've looked at a lot of furniture in my life. And as you look at these things, you start saying, I'm seeing things in this furniture as you sort of get in touch with it about craft techniques or about manufacturing techniques or about maybe even to the point where you kind of know how the craftsman, used his tools on it. You can kind of commune with the person who made the furniture. This particular table, Andy will be pleased to know, has a rosewood veneered top. The entire base section of it is faux grained rosewood. They weren't using rosewood in the solid like this. It was too valuable, and they probably couldn't get a lot of it that was too thick. A lot of it was pre-sawn coming from Brazil, actually, as a matter of fact. This is a chance to sort of get under Fife's skin for a little minute and look at the rings on the trees. So this is one of those little breaks, like when Wolf Blitzer takes a break and says, time to look at an update on the election. Let's get under Fife's skin. I have lots of good furniture people here. This is real wood, by the way, it's not faux. What are the two woods that you see? Come on. Mahogany here. What's that? Brazilian rosewood. Look for the black vein, the big black vein that runs through it. That's really sort of a telltale sign. These are the two premier woods of the period when this is being made. The rosewood is announced on the list. These tables are part of a world of cabinet making that happens in New York City when you're set free. It used to be you'd have to have a table with 4 legs. And then, well, gee, you know, New York tables are known, card tables in the neoclassical period, in the Chippendale period and neoclassical, as having a 5th leg on them. So you got to swing the leg out when you put the top over. Well, somebody along the line got really smart and made the top swivel. So once the top swiveled, you could have anything you want underneath there. These are called pillar and claw tables, but also you would find things like Lanoyer did with sculptural winged figures and so forth and so on. So this allowed you to open up an incredible panoply of shapes and turnings and things that you could do underneath so that your card table didn't look like Mrs. Jones down the street. You're paying the same price, but you could have something a little bit different, which you would want, of course. The table would twist and then it would be open. And then one of the things that is sort of amazing about Fife in this period of time is that he labeled his work. Between about 1815 and 1823, Fife is documented as shipping a fair amount of furniture out to the South. It's a very small window of time when he does it. And it's kind of interesting as we look at this furniture to think what the physical evidence is telling us. But again, look what the sort of pivoting tops will allow you to have. You have 2 types of trestle or cheval bases or horse-like bases, pillar and claw tables on the left. All of these are labeled. There's a desk and bookcase labeled by Fife as well. He put paper in the wells traditionally, sometimes this pattern, some of the blue pattern that we saw before, like book end papers to keep everything tidy and neat on the inside. And here we have his label, and it's dated August 1820. What are these things about? What is he up to? Why do we have only this little window of time when he's labeling his furniture? A lot of it has to do with the economy and this marketing of the furniture. The August 1820 date. Does anybody have a suggestion why that might be on the piece of furniture? Why would that? Think about this for a second. You're all smart. All right? When you go to the store and you need fresh milk, do you buy it when it's 2 days old? Or do you buy the latest one? You buy the freshest one. So you're marking the date on this furniture and you're shipping it to Charleston or to Savannah. And you're saying the latest styles from New York. Well, what proves it's the latest style more than the label, the freshness dating label on the piece? And this shows up in other makers from New York as well. And I think Fife has to sort of participate in this for a couple of reasons. New York is incredible. This is his workshop that he builds out between 1816 and 1817, literally the period of time when New York cabinet trade is sort of at its zenith. And he's the leader of it. There are 300 master cabinet makers in New York at this time. That's pretty serious competition, and they're looking for markets as well. Things are booming after the War of 1812. You've been shut down for a long time. The South is a great place to sell furniture, but people are coming to New York. Southerners are coming to New York, shopping in Fife shop. You see his salesman or Fife himself in the center window, and on the left you see his workmen or his apprentices looking out the door. That was his first home that he built on the right. By 1817, however, there are comments from Englishmen who are coming to New York saying that cabinet making in New York is a good business, writing back about, whether you might want to come here. But there are too many cabinet makers now. Everybody's a master on his own. All they have are little signs downstairs in the room, ring the bell, and they'll come down and service you. They're all upstairs working, and the showrooms are downstairs. So you have tremendous competition, and it's building all the time. You've got a big labor pool for 300 masters as well. So, you've got 300 master cabinet makers, you've got hundreds more of journeymen working for them. And they band together, the Society of Journeyman Cabinet Makers, and they represent almost as a union to the masters their thoughts on what should be paid for their work. And so these labor documents called the price books emerged. This is Duncan Fife's own example from 1810 on the right. By 1817, a new one is issued with a lot more pages in it. And these price books allow the journeyman and the masters to agree on a price, and then they could adjust it year to year. They reduce it a little bit, raise it a little bit. New forms show up in there, so it's great for decorative arts historians to study it. And this we believe to be the room at the side of the building where Fife's cabinet makers were working. At the time in 1817, Fife owned 5 properties on Fulton Street where this was located. And they were conjoined. And if you look at alleyways through the back, he made a whole warren of little shops in the back as well. So there were statements that he had up to 100 cabinet makers working for him at some point. I'm not sure about that, but it's possible. It's possible. He must have had, 50, 60. But by the 1840s, we have documents saying that there are people of 200 and 300 workmen in some of the cabinet shops in New York. So these are extensive operations. The furniture that's coming out of Fife's shop by 1817, these swivel tables, things like this griffin table that we see, have these canted corners on them. The rounded ones kind of come in a little bit later. The dated tables tell us that, but even in English Regency design, they come a little later than the canted corners. The canted corners are exquisitely made on Fife's work. When you make a veneered corner, getting under the skin, the hidden mitered dovetails on the angles that are there. And the reason for that is so that as the wood shrinks, the end grain of the dovetails don't push into the veneer and read through to the front. When you're buying a table of this period, just bring it into the light sometime and eyeball down the side and you can see the dovetails literally on the end. Don't buy that one. Get the one with the mitered dovetail ends. You'll get more likely to be Fife or Lanier if you're going to get that. So supreme quality, superb quality. The competition, as I mentioned to you before, is fierce. Look at some of the labels from this period. They tell the story. Fife has his cabinet warehouse. The warehouse idea is really what this is about. I've got enough people around to make enough furniture when somebody visits, I can have it for them. I can have enough for them. And that means that you're investing in it. You may not have sold it yet. You've paid people already. You've bought the material. You bought the lumber. So there's a lot of pressure. Look at Charles Christian, Southern and West India cabinet furniture. Christian is shipping that and saying he wants the merchants to come to him. These are the people who will buy bulk and then sell as venture cargo as well. So they're all cabinet warehouses. And look at Michael Allison. He has the date 1817 on his labels. He freshens dates his objects 17, 19, 21, 23, 20. He goes right up into the 1830s. Every 2 years he's putting a date on his labels. Now Fife doesn't do that, but that tells us that Allison is really in the hunt, and he's probably looking at Lanier, he's looking at Fife, and he's copying them, and he's sending his things out, and he'll say sort of, this is really advanced, this is advanced. Now, these tables are really quite amazing, and they tell us something about the labor practices of the period. I talked about the journeyman cabinet makers. I talked about the number of them that were around. In 1819, these are dated 1820, you had the first panic in the United States. It's the first Great Recession, essentially. Manufacturers, hard time finding markets for manufacturers out in New York City and other places as well. And so what they're really having to do is they're going to have to cut back. Fife's workmen in his shop walk out on him that year because he unilaterally cuts their wages. And they say, forget about this. We're going to open our own cabinet business, and we're going to make the kind of furniture that we made for you. Fife had enough capital that outlasted them. They all had to come back. He was a very shrewd businessman, but he also was involved with something that begins to change the story about American cabinet making. We like to think of these guys as, Duncan Fife from Scotland. He had his own toolbox. He was terrific. He got his apprenticeship training, and then you could go learn from him. He'd work for 7 years, and he'd have a great job, blah, 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 blah. Except that's not how it worked out. When you had to make a lot of furniture, what they would do is, you're a specialist. You're really good at veneering. You're really good at stuffing cushions. You're really good at sawing this board. You go over here. I'll show you how to do that. We'll be done in a year with you. So apprenticeships were granted, but there was a lot of legal stuff going on, or court cases that you can read about where these apprentices are not given full training. They're complaining bitterly. Charles Christian was notorious for this, not giving them full training. And instead what you're having is a furniture industry beginning to develop. All of the labeled card tables, and also the card tables from the Donaldson family that were recently purchased, have these rounded corners on them. And if you look at them, there are a lot of woodworkers here. You see a lot of kerfs in there. And then you look carefully, you see the laminations. These are laminated of 2 pieces of pine that are curve cut so you can bend them. And once you bend them, then and you glue them together and you're probably bending them on a form. So now you've got all your corners made, right? Then the corners, this is my sort of pathetic attempt at dovetailing with PowerPoint, just because it didn't read well so through, are then dovetailed into the sides and to the front rails. And of course, what you wind up with Fife is what I would call a slightly inelegant, but well done always, little epaulette on the corner here, a little raised plaque of veneer, because you didn't want any of these cuts or anything unusual reading through on the piece. So imagine now, I've got a shop, I've got 7 different models of bases. They're all turned, they're on the shelf. I've got all these corners made, but they're not veneered yet. Go get some corners, go get some bases, go get some legs, start putting these things together. Hey, guess what? I can cut some guys out of this shop. This is what this furniture tells you. It is the byway of the rings in the tree. You know how to do it. This is the enthusiasm that you can sort of invest in something like this. You sort of understand the context, the byways about all of this, and you begin to open people's eyes to this change in furniture making that is literally occurring in that era right after the War of 1812, when we're going from sort of old shop style to industrialization. It's not happening in the country where things hang on a little bit longer, but it's happening in the cities. Luckily for us, this kind of adventure investigations of the labeled and the documented pieces and the bills allowed us to take a piece that was at Edgewater already that Dick acquired. I came there and I said, hey, Dick, you've got one here. Let's turn this one over. Literally the same, beautifully executed. And Shotzi and I, on my last visit to Airmount, found a table under a lamp in one of the rooms. And we said, hey, Shotzi, I think that's one of them too. And bingo, you got another Fife table, in the house as well. So there's Fife and there's Fife. And digging in on the furniture, sort of getting under Fife's skin, really allows us to tell the story, to open the story up for people as well. The Baker House, Kane Garden is the next house that sort of was purchased by Dick Jenrette in 1985, Estate Kane Garden. The same year, an Airmount at the same time. They bought in the same year. He's sort of bunching this up. Kane Garden's a remarkable place. It is said to have been built originally in 1815. It has a gorgeous plan where you come in through that temple form on the back where the drive is. You can walk through the house and out to the front and down the steps towards the sea. On the interior, every one of Dick's houses, you have to count the porch as a room because he has them outfitted so comfortably. You have your meals there and looking out onto the Caribbean. And here you have an entry point into the main or the great room of the house. This particular house had been destroyed in a hurricane in the early 20th century. By 1949, all that was left was the shell of the house. It was coral, made of coral, ledge coral from the ocean right out there. And the walls were there, but the roof was gone. The interior was largely gone. So this is essentially a reproduction or a rebuild. And the Wall family rebuilt it, and Dick made it better. But the Wall family collected island furniture, which is sort of interesting. And it includes beds and it includes tables like you see on the right. The Chippendale chairs that are there were from another plantation, the Wim plantation, that was owned by the McAvoy family, the same as his family. There's a lot of work to be done there on the Caribbean furniture as well. When you look out the front of Kane Garden, this is what you see. A gorgeous, gorgeous view out to Watch, I forget what Dick calls it, Watch Hill or something out in the distance. The Estate Kane Garden was a Danish island and it became a U.S. island in 1919. And every one of those little squares that you see marked off with the little buildings on them are sugar mills. This is an 18th century Danish map that shows how the estates are laid out. Many of them run by Scots-Irish, like the McAvoy family, who eventually became Danish. Our most famous visitor personage, I think, on St. Croix is Alexander Hamilton. The reason I put his portrait in is Dick acquired this painting for the Donaldson, Lefkin, and Jenrette collection from the Chamber of Commerce in New York, and recently it was made as a gift by Credit Suisse, who bought DLJ, to both the American Wing and to Crystal Bridges. But Alexander Hamilton, as a young man, was taken there by his mother, and he lived in St. Croix and clerked in Christiansted, and made his way from Christiansted in 1772 back to the United States. And I think any visitor who would like to go to St. Croix will also sort of absorb, I think, some of that wonderful American history. So the McAvoy House, or estate Kane Garden, looked very much was part of this world, the 1816 view of St. Croix. The windmills for the sugar mills, the welcoming arms, as I mentioned before, looking out to the ocean for estate Kane Garden. And you can see very much from an 1830s print what a house on St. Croix looked like. But more importantly, and what's fantastic about St. Croix is that a number of the original ruins for the windmill and the slave quarters are all there. We recently have had interest in a summer dig by some graduate students from Stanford University at the hospital there to help us to understand more about the place. The furniture is important here, but I think there's also the sense that we have great opportunities with these properties that Dick has so lovingly acquired. It looks like something seen from the Roman Campagna or something, but what these are feeding areas for wood, for the boilers, for boiling down the sugar. So the responsibility for the ruins are there just as much as they are for the house. The Baker House complex, as I described to you before, we know pretty well, and I'm not going to discuss it tonight, but Airmount is a house that is not far from here that I would encourage everybody to visit if they possibly can. It's a simpler house than many that Dick has acquired. You know, I don't think there's a house with columns Dick has ever seen that he didn't like, but the porch, the small portico, I think, has to do the trick for him here. Airmount is a house that was built in 1815 by William Kirkland, who was from Ayr, Scotland, hence the name. He came in the 1780s to North Carolina. He was a merchant. By 1811, I think he made a trip back to Scotland and sort of was wealthy enough to do that and came back with the ambition to build a beautiful home in Hillsborough, North Carolina. Understated, brick, beautiful home with not as showy as some of the others that we have seen, but a very unusual lateral hallway here with a wing on either side and an extensively large dining room at the back. This is a house that Dick has decorated beautifully with a lot of New York things, but there are family possessions there as well. I would love to see us be able in the future to sort of dig in a little bit more and for me to learn more about North Carolina furniture and the kinds of things we might have found in this house as well. One of the places that we do have an original piece is the dining table that was owned by the Kirkland family. It has turnings, to my eye, that are very close to the William Thompson tables that were built for the desks that were built for the legislature in Raleigh. It could date as late as the period of the 1830s or so, and William Kirkland's portraits. But look at the detailing of the interior in 1815, and really it's essentially Adam-style ornament that has been pumped up and made larger for its setting, and very strong in detail, like the mantle that we see. The most wonderful piece of furniture in the house is actually a built-in walnut cupboard that's in this room. The other rooms have painted, some other rooms have painted covers in them, but this is an extraordinary piece of work that everybody who likes furniture and admires it loves to see when they get there. One of the things about Airmount that's so great is that it was originally on over 500 acres, and Dick has managed to acquire about half of this back. He had the grounds lovingly landscaped, a lot of trees and shrubbery, bushes and things that were taken down to create almost an English estate-looking space. And there's a beautiful trail, sort of the Poets Walk. But from my way of thinking, the most exciting thing about Airmount and the grounds is that it's the home of the Occoneechee Speedway, the first NASCAR track, I think, track for the North Carolina circuit, the NASCAR circuit after World War II. And luckily, it's kind of wonderful because it's down in the woods. It was down in the woods below Airmount, and when a interstate highway was supposed to go through there, what saved it from going through was the Occoneechee Speedway, not the Airmount, which is good for Occoneechee Speedway. When I was there on my last visit, Bill Crowther gave me the opportunity to take the rental car and drive around the track. My most exciting experience to date. The last house that I'd like to talk about today is another one of these houses that has, a strong Fife connection. That's Milford Plantation. 45 minutes from Columbia, South Carolina, in Pinewood, Sumter County, today Clarendon County. It was the home of John Lawrence Manning, who was the governor of South Carolina, He was elected to the U.S. Senate. He wasn't seated, however, because of the Civil War. He signed the Ordinance of Secession. He was in 1860, the sixth largest slave owner in the South. His plantations were in Louisiana, however. And he acquired them through his marriage to his wife, Susan Hampton Manning, who inherited part of an estate called Humus that was there. And so the capital was there for him to build this grand Greek revival pile. Yet again, this is completed in 1841. So between 1839 and 1841, it's built. It's directly quoting the Charleston Hotel. There's some thinking that Reichert was involved with it. We know the builder of it. This is the young couple that built this in 1839 to 1841, each of them 22 years old. Susan Hampton Manning on the right, John Lawrence Manning on the left. They wanted to make a statement with this house. It was on the road between, not far from Camden, and it was actually not as remote in its day as it is today. This was a road that was well traveled. He wanted to have a place that would be a grand country seat for a man of his status. And again, the Charleston Hotel, as I mentioned to you before, was very important to his design. We know from Manning's correspondence with the builder of the house that the two of them were looking at Menard Lefevre's Beauties of Modern Architecture as if it was distance correspondence. You have a copy of it, published in 1835, and I have a copy. We're going to use the capital, the Corinthian capital, based on the order of Leucicrides. This is the Leucicrides column on the Capitol in Charleston. The Capitol's on the Charleston Hotel before it was taken down. The Capitals at Milford are virtually identical to this. These are carved of cypress, probably, as are the Capitals at Milford. So there's this really close connection between what's going on in the city. The man who built the house was Nathaniel Potter, and he signed the plan that he sent to Donaldson. And you can see where the colonnade is at the front, and this sort of four-square plan with an apse-ended dining room on the right, a double parlor, and a smaller library in the front right for you. Again, as you enter the house, the colonnade and the porch are always important to Dick's spaces. And here we have another carpet based on the North Carolina state capitol. And the width of the hall is a little deceptive here. It actually feels wider than this photograph is telling you. The original lighting fixtures from Hayden and Gregg, supplied by Hayden and Gregg, probably from Birmingham, England, in 1841 of Charleston. The apse-ended the sort of circular staircase at the back, and the oculus that lights it in sort of a beautiful painted design, all the ornament based on Menard Lefevre. The double parlor, as we see here, outfitted with some of the original furniture in it, is just absolutely beautiful. We have a music event there every year, and we clear all the furniture out, and the musicians who play there are so astounded by the acoustics. It's just remarkable, and I was as well. And then we've discovered in the records that Manning had a slave quartet that played classical music for him at events. He provided them with the opportunity to train as classical musicians, which is sort of astounding to us today, but makes perfect sense. It makes absolute sense. The dining room, the library looking back to the dining room that I mentioned to you before. The furniture that was made from Milford is this bold, scrolled, what Duncan Fife called his Grecian scroll design. And you can see the newel post at Milford has such a close relationship in terms of the strap work on it to the one of the recamiers or the couches from the room. This time beauty's only skin deep, however. We're not going beneath. And we're looking at a new wood that's entered the picture in the center. Everybody down here should know what the one in the middle is. What is that? Walnut. First time I encountered Milford as a person studying Duncan Fife was, I guess in probably 2005 or so I was there first time. And when I went in, I was just blown away by it. The first experience was incredible. But what I was focusing on was the fact that we knew that in 1841, Duncan Fife and Son, by this point his son James is in business with him, supplied 98 crates of furniture to Milford, to John Lawrence Manning, which was incredible. And a lot of this furniture was left behind in the house when it was sold by the Manning family in 1902 to the Clark family of Michigan. Some of it was scattered about. The Clarks gave some of it away. Some family took a little bit, but a lot of it was in the attic still. And Dick began the process, in this case, of bringing all this furniture back together again. Here's the view of the hallway from an late 19th century photograph. Here it is today with Dick's things in it. We can definitely see that we need to be looking for some other things. The recamiers are in there, but the tables are not. In the parlor, we see the double parlor with lots of furniture with slip covers on it. We see what looked like two Elizabethan chairs. Literally on the bills came down to, the bill of lading from Fife's nephews, who were the upholsterers on this project, were two antique chairs, which are probably these two chairs that we see right now that were for the library, or said to be for the library. So I imagine John Lawrence Manning and Susan sitting in the chairs reading Sir Walter Scott as they're looking out the window at their little Gothic folly down in the spring, which was built as well. So you sort of kind of get yourself into the mindset. And so the parlor, again, as it looks today, is probably quite different from what it was originally. One of the things that the bills told us, which I kind of knew, but it really didn't, the scales didn't fall from my eyes until I read it over again a couple of times. But it talked about walnut furniture, walnut couches, walnut chairs, mahogany. It never mentioned rosewood because we don't have the bill of lading for all of it. But I started to sort of walk around the house and study it a little bit, and then it just dawned on me that we need to pay attention to this wood. We need to pay attention to the wood. And then this recamier shows up in the photograph from the hall. And if you look at the veneering that's on the base, I thought it was mahogany because it was all colored. It indeed is walnut. So 4 of the recamiers were in the hall with cross-banded crotch walnut, as we see here. These 2 large slab tables, which Dick now has in the dining room, turned out to be walnut. They belong in the hall. So we can sort of be able to piece this all together, or the skin of this stuff starts to tell us what's going on. The armchairs that we saw in the hall a moment ago, here, there were multiple armchairs. I think there were 8 of them originally, and there's the side table. 2 of them were at the Historic Columbia Foundation in the Hampton Preston House that's there, where they were taken by John Lawrence Manning when he moved back to Columbia as an old man. 2 more are in the family still. Very simple. You wouldn't accuse them necessarily of being Duncan Fife, but they're simple hall furniture. And underneath the yellow damask upholstery on it, when we peeled it back, the curator there was horrified. I'm always trying to peel everything back. But we peeled it back, and underneath was the original 19th century naugahyde of a canvas painted faux leather, what we can actually make out in the black and white photographs. So the hallway was outfitted with furniture that guys coming in their wet boots could sit on. The lady of the house wouldn't have to worry about it. It was not quite as elegant as the drawing room or the dining room. The drawing room, of course, had the rosewood furniture in it, and if you read back into George Smith again, he prescribes rosewood furniture for only the finest drawing rooms, state drawing rooms, mahogany for bedrooms, dining rooms, and parlors. Now, I don't know the difference between a drawing room and a parlor, but we can begin to have a declension of the types of woods that were used in the various settings. And these are solid rosewood rather than grained, which was unusual for this period of time, which said that they were really going all out for this particular set of 16 chairs that were made for there. The window seats were rosewood, and this retains its original, a reproduction of its original fabric that was on it in 1841, really quite beautiful. And we also made fabric for the sofa that was original to the house that's now at the Columbia Art Museum, given by the Clark family. So someday, in my mind's eye, I'd love to see all of these things come back there. Dick's rooms are absolutely beautiful, but this is the 175th anniversary of Milford, and my co-president, Margise Howell, and I are plotting ways on seeing if we can have a rendezvous of things that are in other families or other museums to sort of bring them together again for one more time. Here is the sofa table in rosewood. One of the confusing things for me as I started sorting all of this out was a group of these wonderful armchairs that are there, comfortable chairs. They're all mahogany, and they were in the parlor, and I just didn't know where to place them in mine because I kept saying, oh, it's supposed to be rosewood in here. And lo and behold, visited, you can see the mahogany, a family descendant who had one of these chairs in her, basically her attic. And there it was, and I got to see it up close and personal, and there's your rosewood graining on the chair. So same history. I wish I had Andy to do the graining in the Fife shop, because that's pretty rudimentary looking to my eye. But again, it's on the rosewood. So you think, on the mahogany, so you think through what's going on in the Fife shop. Why is he getting these done in rosewood graining while the rest are solid? The expense for the smaller chairs, was probably substantial in the veneered work. But when he got to the point of these, he either said, not so much money, let's grain them, or else he didn't have these in rosewood and he wanted them right away, so Fife would have his grainer do the frame. Before all of what I've said to you tonight and this wonderful tour of Dick's houses are over on the screen, not the wonderful tour, the tour of Dick's wonderful houses are over on the screen, I wanted to, when it fades into your memory, I wanted to remind you that we have an open door policy. We love having visitors, we love having people looking at our things, we like having knowledgeable people come like you to look at some of the things in our collection to remind us or to help us to figure out what we have, to sort of take us down the byways and into the background to keep this all exciting and fresh for our visitors as well. So please visit the Classical American Homes website to see about visitation. I have a number of brochures out on the table on the outside. It's been a pleasure to speak with you tonight, and I'm here for questions later or now or whenever. So thank you very much.